Welcome one, welcome all, and a very, very happy Mother's Day to everyone out there as well. We are going to be covering Darlington today, and well, we already had a full weekend of racing with the trucks race kicking off on Friday, a lot of the chalk crashing out, and then an Xfinity race racing on Saturday with the chalk crashing early and not really recovering too much, and Sammy Smith going upside down. No, not really upside down. It's just his DFS performance was looking so great all day and then absolutely bundles it at the last minute. So looks a little bit frustrating here over the weekend, but I know that we can recover. I know that we have a great slate ahead of us. And you know what's great? Look at this guy in the chat. Look at that Wiley here. You know, he's giving us a good morning, a good afternoon there from Lexington, Kentucky. And you know, stats, Kentucky has been having an absolute party over the last few weeks, and it continues here. You know, we have the Kentucky Derby last week, right? You know, it's all great in Louisville. And then 2 weeks later, you know, going on May 19th, May 18th, the PGA Championship is coming to Louisville as well. So, and then I know you're going to be in town June 8th, right? Are you going to the UFC? Yep. Louisville. So Louisville, Kentucky specifically has been absolutely popping off with just event after event in the sporting world. You know, hopefully the Kentucky Speedway makes its way back into the NASCAR rotation. I think they raced there twice. The second time was the last one before COVID, and then it just never happened again. But who needs more 1.5 milers, especially when Kansas is out there and we can just race Kansas every week? You know, that would be a great thing. But stats. First off, how did you do last week? I was so excited last week. I was winning the whole race. I was like, this is going to be a great slate. And then this last-minute caution happened, and it saved all those guys who stayed out, who weren't going to make it on fuel. More specifically, Denny Hamlin was the one who was absolutely saved. Chris Buescher got there at the end, too, and then Kyle Larson nudging out Chris Buescher. I mean, we have to start with that. Last week was just an insane race. How'd you do? I mean, hopefully, maybe we see some more racing like that this week.
I don't know if we could get as good a race or at least as good a finish as we did last week. I mean, that was insane. One of the best finishes. I think it was the closest finish in the history of NASCAR. So, I mean, that was insane. The Buescher stuff was a little bit. I mean, nobody played Buescher, and how could you? I mean, I think he was starting like 12th. I mean, you just didn't expect it. And then I was running well. I think we were all probably running really well until that last caution came out. You get the caution and you get Hamlin moves up to the front and Buescher moves up to, like, they were dead because they were off. They were just totally off on the pits there. And I believe Buescher had a penalty at one point, got him pushed back into the rear. And so it was looking good. Like that was one guy I was fading. I had 0 Buescher in my lineup. So definitely didn't want to see him up at the top. That caution hits and they're like, well, this is going to bring Denny and Buescher back into play. And that's the last thing I wanted to see. I was sitting, I think I was like 12th at one point late with no Buescher. So it was like, I mean, it was crazy. Still finished okay. It wasn't bad, but you really, you know, there was 8% of lineups, 10% of lineups, whatever it was, had Buescher, and you were going to have to need him there in order to win. But that's the thing. I mean, that's the thing with NASCAR a lot of times. And we're going to talk about that today because you're going to get guys in here today. There's a good chance that this is not a very chalky lineup that's going to win today. NASCAR, anything can happen. We just don't, you know, we could not foresee a Buescher. No one did. Terrible starting position. You'll see historically that's actually happened at this track. Guys starting at like 15th that aren't going to be necessarily high owned and they get a really good finish. This is a track that's got a little bit of carnage history to it. You can wreck here quite easily. It's tire wear track. You see when the tires get worn on the long runs, that's when these cars can start going into the wall. You got to run high at this track, so crash into the wall at high speeds. It's a high bank, high steep track, so the speeds here are high. There's just a lot of opportunity for some wrecking, and that's led to some unusual DFS lineups that have won here in the past. So, we could get to that in a second. I want to go over actually some of the line. I'll do that in a bit. Just get your take on it first, but I'll go over some of the recent lineups and just how it's fared out over the last couple of years in the next gen cars here.
Yeah, I absolutely want to get that because I do think it's important, especially on a track like this. Like, if you were watching the Xfinity race, well, we were like, what, 7 laps in or something, and William Byron's tire, I think it was his right front, just gave out. I think it was a slow league, and all of a sudden it turned into the tire just popping and just rammed him into the wall there. And, tires matter a lot, and they mattered a lot last week. I think, obviously this is a different track. It's a different style in terms of just the shape of it. But you also have to just remember last week, Derek Kraus was racking up fastest lap after fastest lap because he was the very last one to pit. And it was hilarious that, Derek Kraus ended up being completely optimal because he just got, he farmed like 18 fastest lap points or something like that. And you're going to see stuff like that where there's a lot of tire fall off. And all of a sudden, if you're the last one to pit again, sick, you can bank into those points. And it's hard to ever pick out, who's going to pit last or whatever. If there was a guy who I could pinpoint it it would probably be Derek Kraus because I think they're going to run that same strategy, right? But, you obviously don't want to really just bake that into the plan. He's for sure going to do that. But with that high tire wear, you're going to see guys who were up there last week. You had Denny Hamlin, you had Truex in the mix, you had Larson in the mix. This is a track that I feel like whoever performed last week, we can kind of just look back on, be like, you know what? We know who saves tires. We know who doesn't. We know we want the vets here. We know that Hamlin's going to be in the mix at the end. Truex going to be in the mix at the end. Larson. I think that we can kind of treat it that way. It's where we don't want first timers here at Darlington. I think that's something that I was learning over the weekend too. Just more specifically, you had guys just struggling early. Just guys who were on the track for the first time. Who didn't really struggle that bad? Van Gisbergen, he actually impressed me. He was beating out Josh Williams, his teammate in the Xfinity series. I was absolutely shocked, but still, I think going for more veteran presence, more guys who can save their tires could be key here. And we're about to get into the plays, but I also, you said you got those lineups from previous years at Darlington. I think that's going to be great to kind of look at because this is a race that outside a couple chalky options, I don't think we're going to see like the drastic ownership that we saw like William Byron last week, where he was one of the only guys who took 4 tires last week and didn't move up in the pack in the last restart. But you don't really have that this week. And I think the highest guy I had was probably Larson, and then it's Gragson and Hamlin kind of up there. But none of them, I don't think we're going to see a 50% owned guy. I think it's going to be very close for Larson though.
I'm going to disagree and say that we do. I think Gragson and Jones. See, I think Jones is going to be high owned.
I think Jones is going to be north of 50.
Yeah, it's going to be close. Yeah, I think he's going to be close to 50. I think both Gragson and Jones are going to be the 2 highest owned, and I think then you're going to get those higher price guys like Larson and some of those other guys, Hamlin and whatnot. But Hamlin will be a little bit lower, but Larson will be up there. I think they're going to be close. If not 50, they're going to be in the mid 40s. All three of those guys, basically Larson, Gragson, and Jones. Jones has a great history. I mean, we'll get to it, but Jones pretty good history at this track, and of course starting pretty far back at a reasonable price. So, but let's kind of get into the track here and what we've seen previously, and just kind of what the builds look like. What I found interesting when I was looking back at past DFS nut lineups is just how often the guy who led the most laps, and this was like a significant number of laps, led like 100 plus laps, did not make it into the nuts. So really what you wanted to have, because typically what we're going to see is the guys who lead the most laps are going to come from up front. And those guys, because we've talked about this track, so many wacky things can happen here. I think you had Truex. Let me give you, I'll just go by like the last 4 years. I'll just give you an example here. Last year's race, you had Denny Hamlin led 177 laps, winds up finishing 25th, and he started second, right? So he was, he was not in the nuts. Only got you 59 points, right? Denny Hamlin, the last time out here. You had Truex had 145 laps led the race before that, finished 31st, was not in the nuts. Chastain led 93 laps and wound up finishing 29th. Those guys basically ate up all the Dom points. Neither one of them made their way into the winning lineup. But then before that, you had Logano, I'll try to get it right, 107 laps led in that race, and he started on the pole and wound up winning the race. So he was in the nuts, but all the guys, there was like a handful of guys who had 25 to 40 laps led behind him, and none of those guys were close to being in the winning lineup. So you only had one dominator, and he came through. And then the race before that, Kyle Busch had 155 laps led, wound up finishing in 30th in that race, and he started 5th, so he was not in the winner. Logano had 64 laps led, finished 4th on the pole, and he was in the winner. So we've seen this race where the laps and the dominated points can get eaten up by one or two guys. And then if those guys don't finish near the top, and typically the guys dominating the race are starting near the top, we can get those guys not into a winning lineup. So I think even more so with some decent value in place differential, you're going to see at least 4 or 5 good PD plays. And really, it's not just PD, it's finishing position. So what we've seen is the winning lineups are going to have 4 or 5 drivers finish in like the top 7 or 8 at a minimal. And then if you get one of these really cheap guys who just has a decent finish for you, they may finish outside the top 10. So that's kind of the construction that we're looking at for this week.
Yeah, it's very interesting to note. I mean, crashing out late. I mean, this is a track where you can kind of expect a little bit of chaos coming into those turns, especially on turn 2, where they're saying there's a little bit of a bump there. And that's where a couple guys lost it over the last couple days, too, is like it could lead to a little bit of disaster. I mean, we obviously saw it. The chalk really did not hit the last 2 days at all. So it's going to be an interesting slate. We're going to go ahead and start at the top. We're going to go through the salary, probably the 10K range and up first. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. So basically, we're going to go 10K and up to start. This is also a track where I think, I was listening to the announcers, whoever it was on Saturday for the Xfinity race, but just being able to rip a high line. That's why we got Tyler Reddick, starting on pole here. This is very interesting for him. It's because if there is a race where you can kind of profile well, where you can kind of run a little bit of a different line than others, if he is trailing, or maybe he's finding a groove up there at the top, like he's one of those guys who I can just imagine just running along the wall. And he might tap the wall a couple times a day. And same thing with Larson. Those guys might tap the wall a couple times, just kind of hope that the car stays intact. But those are two guys I kind of associated a track like this to where I feel like they can find a little bit more speed on the edge of the track there than some others. And then obviously we have Hamlin and Truex, who very, very good about saving their tires, very, very good about being there late in the race. Byron is a guy where, last week just wasn't really his week, right? You just didn't really find his groove. Starting 5th this week, I think he's going to be the lowest owned out of the 10K guys, except for Christopher Bell. I think Christopher Bell is going to come in a little bit lower owned than him. But is he the forgotten Hendrick car? And should we be forgetting about him? Or do you think maybe we should look a little bit more into Byron and Larson a little bit more here? Or are you going to focus more on the Toyotas?
Here's the thing about Byron. When you looked at the practice, and I think practice matters here. Sometimes we don't look at the practice times, and you're going to want to be good on the long run. And Byron was the best. He had the best. Everyone ran at least 15 laps. He had the best 15 lap time out there. So I think Byron he was also in Group A, where Group A was not nearly as good in practice times as Group B. So he had the best time in Group A when almost all the other good times were in Group B. I think Byron could be sneaky as a player. I do think he's going to be fairly low owned from these high price guys. Starts 5th. But like I said, I went through the previous lineups where we've got a lot of guys can chew up these Dom points. I don't expect him to get out necessarily to the front, but if he wins this race, good chance he's going to be the guy in the nut lineup, because you have a decent likelihood that someone like maybe a Reddick could lead a lot of laps here and then not finish on the nut. So the way I think either Byron gets out there, gets a lot of laps led, and of course dominates that way and then gets you a strong finish, or he just finishes really high with someone chewing up the Dom points at this high price range and falls off with some wrecking in this race. So I think that's a fairly good likelihood. I don't mind taking Byron here as an alternative play to a Larson or a Hamlin if you're looking for just one of these high price guys. Hamlin, again, he's going to save tires. That's what I like. I like those guys. The Hamlin, the Truex as well, who's in this range. I'm going to take a little bit of a shot. I put Truex in my core. He's not my highest owned guy. I don't have him higher than everyone else, but I just think his history, and I think he's kind of hidden here because he's got a really bad finish position track history, but he's done really well at dominating these races. He's gotten up front. He's led a lot of laps. So I think he could be sneaky where maybe people are going to overlook Truex just if they look on his history at this track. I mean, the last 4 times out, 24th, 31st, 31st, 18th, looks atrocious. But as I was mentioning earlier, he had that really bad finish while dominating a ton of laps. So if we could get a little bit luckier with Truex, he has the ability to get out front. He has the ability to save tires. I think he could be a sneaky play here. I mean, Larson is obviously the chalk. That's the nut play. I mean, you look at his history. He won the last race out here. He was in the winning lineup. Look at the intermediate tracks this year. He's got a first, 21st, then a second, and a first. So he's been unbelievably good at the intermediate tracks. He's the favorite to win the race. That's where most people are going to go. I think this is a week where you can feel more comfortable fading chalk. So I have no problem getting off of a Larson and maybe getting on a Denny Hamlin, or if you want to go with Byron or Truex, I'm good with all of those guys. Now, Reddick is going to start at the pole, and we've seen the pole. Now, the first two, or the front line, I should say, has done really well at getting out front here and leading a bunch of laps. The problem is, obviously, as I've shown you, you're going to have a strong finish, not just lead these laps. So I think that's where maybe he may possibly get a little bit overvalued. I think he's going to probably be in the 30% range. I have no problem kind of fading the Dom points here for finish position. And, you know, Reddick's a guy, look, he could run that top line. He's had success here. He's had a second place finish here. I mean, second, third, 22nd, and second. I mean, the track history over the last 4 trips has been remarkable. But I think that's another play that we could fade and just hope that necessarily we could possibly get a little bit of wrecking in this race, and then maybe move to one of these other guys at this higher range. And then Bell, I agree with you, will be definitely the lowest owned. Decent history back in 22. He had a 5th and a 6th, but then last year 4th and 23rd. He's been kind of not great at the intermediate track so far this year, although he did have a 6th at Kansas. If we're looking at tracks that probably correlate the best, Vegas is probably the track that you want to look at. So, and then again, just look at these practice times. One thing we didn't mention, and we don't have any in this group, but you know, the Fords look a lot better this week. So the Fords have typically been the longest shot of the manufacturers to win, but they're getting a little bit of money here, the Fords. We don't have any in this group, but you know, keep an eye on them as well.
Yes, very much so. And I think this is going to be worth talking about now. We have 4 guys starting inside the top 10 here. Obviously, we got Reddick, Byron, Larson, and Hamlin. All right, so if I were looking at it like this, we can go ahead and just talk about Keselowski, Buescher, Gibbs, Wallace, Chastain, and whoever else I'm missing, right? Would you set up a minimum of 2 dominators on a race like this? I know that you talked about it earlier. It's where, like, you know, some of these guys have led a lot of laps and crashed out and not been in the optimal. But when we're looking at a race, what is it, 293 laps or something like that, 400 miles, or I probably went way too high on that. Oh my goodness, it is 293 laps. It is. Okay. So you have 209 Dom points available out there with fast laps and laps led. Would you do a minimum 2 Doms for a track like this?
No, I think 2 is too many. Yeah, I think 1, you're going to be looking for 1 Dom here at least. So you're not going to limit it necessarily, but I don't want to force in 2 because I think you could easily just get 1 Dom wins this race, and we get a lot of PD to follow. So typically what I've been seeing on the better lineups from or the nut lineups, at least from past seasons, is it's really about not just place differential, it's about finish position. So we want to get the drivers who are going to finish high. That's what I'm looking at more. I'm not so concerned about dominating. One of these guys up near the top is going to dominate, but they're still going to have a decent finish. And this is the type of place that, again, we've talked about it. You can dominate a lot of the race and then finish in the 30s. So that can happen. And it's a little bit smaller track. This is a mile, 1.3 miles as opposed to 1.5. You can get lapped here. Something happened. You blow a tire. We saw it with Byron in the Xfinity. He was, 2 or 3 laps down early in that race. So he blew a tire at really one of the bad spots on the track to do it. He had to drive all the way around the track to get back to the pits. But yeah, if that happens to you late in the race, you are going to finish way back. So there is that possibility. I like just one dominator for my lineups this week.
Perfect. So that's a good rule too. I got the dominators highlighted on the playbook. The playbook will be finished here after this show. Again, RPS 15% off your first payment here. And it's not just NASCAR if you don't want it. Let's say we have a whole racing package as well, but we also got NBA, we got baseball. I know Boynton has been absolutely crushing. I know JBC shipped 65K and basketball the other day too. So lots of sports to choose from. Again, code RPS15. 15% off your first payment. I know that your guys' tags are all up, and we're going to go ahead and dive into this 9K range with Friday's winner, Ross Chastain, leading the helm here. He was a winner, basically fortunate that Corey Heim wrecked out, Kyle Busch wrecked out, and Chastain was one of those guys who took advantage of that and ended up getting the win on Friday night. You also get a Chase Elliott, starting 31st. Starting 31st here, and if you look at it, right, if you want 50 points from him, it's just a 12th place finish for him. Is that enough at 9,800, though? I can't wait to hear your answer. We also got Kyle Busch starting 11th, where you made a claim that this is very comparable to Vegas. Well, Kyle Busch was at least half decent in Vegas this year, and it was running very, very strongly until a little bit of a late issue, I think, kind of held him back. But he was looking very strong in Vegas. Didn't even look that bad last week either. So he's very interesting. You got Keselowski starting second. He's another guy who's very interesting as well. And Blaney, a Ford, who you said the Fords are looking much better this week. Go ahead and start on Chase Elliott, because I think Chase Elliott is going to be very popular. But do you think he has the upside to be in the winning lineup today?
Yeah, I mean, Chase is going to be extremely popular, starting 31st. His practice times were really good as well. So I love Chase Elliott here. I think he's absolute cash play. You have to have him in the lineup. Look what he's done at the mile and a halves. He's got a 12th and a 1st, 5th, and 3rd this year. He's had pretty decent track history. You go back to 22, and we know he had problems in 23, and he still finished well here. 5th, 36th, and 3rd, and 8th. I'm pretty high on Chase Elliott for this race, and I think the market's going to be up there as well. We should see 35 to 40%, I think, owned on Chase Elliott. But I think this is it's pretty good chalk just from his track history. Again, I have no problem fading any of the chalk this week, because I do think we're going to see a little bit of a messy race. But in cash lineups, I'd have a hard time not having Chase Elliott in there. You look at Chastain, his practice time's not good at all. Starting 9th, I'm not too high on Chastain. I know, he won here this weekend, but yeah, I'm not terribly high starting 9th. I think he's going to have to finish with that 9th starting position. He's going to have to finish really high. And I just don't see it happening. I'm trying to see where his price is plus, depending on the sports book, plus 1,600, plus 2,200, which is looks like right around the 10th best option on the board, which is sort of where he's starting. So I don't like the upside there. I mean, I'm hoping it's not a Buescher situation this week, but I'm not terribly high on Chastain. Kyle Busch, I think, is the interesting choice. I think a lot of people are going to be down on Kyle Busch. Understandably so. He starts at the 11th spot. He starts at 11th. Excuse me, you mentioned it. He's got a pretty good history in Vegas. This is a veteran guy. He's done pretty, sneaky well in his last few mile and a halves. Texas a 9th, Dover 4th, 8th in Kansas. And actually the track that he loves the most is Vegas. That correlates the best. He had a pretty poor finish, but I think Kyle Busch could be a sneaky play. A lot of people will be off him. I think he could potentially get a high finish. His practice time is not terrible. He was 13th in the 15th lap time. Not awful. So I think for a low-owned guy, I actually like Kyle Busch a little bit. Now, the guy who's getting all the talk, I think, this week is Keselowski to potentially win this race. He starts second. So again, we've seen in that front row, he could easily get out front, but he's going to have to finish this race. Again, at that second spot, he's going to have to finish really close to the top. Keselowski's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's 6th in the betting markets right now. So he is getting, I've heard a lot of podcasts and a lot of written stuff about Keselowski, where people are on him this week. So I think he may be a little bit overowned in DFS, but not a bad option. Where if I think he could easily, for this price, be the guy who gets the most dom points. I think he can get out there. I like the fact that Keselowski will be good on these tires as well. So he will be low owned. And if you want to make a pivot, maybe off of some of the other guys that are starting high and are high priced, you do get obviously a bit of a break on the price, and you could get someone finish here in the top 3 with a lot of dom points in Keselowski. So I think he's an interesting play at a low ownership as well. The Blaney, right? We didn't talk about. I don't know about Blaney here. I just think the starting position is not terrible. Starting 17th, he's in a Ford. Like I said, I think the RFKs are probably better than Penske from what I have seen. Not terrible in practice. He was ninth in his in the 15 laps, so not awful in practice. I don't mind. He's definitely going to be in the mix for me. I'm not terribly high on him. I think 15% is something comfortable. Logano, again, his teammate in the Ford for Penske. Logano was decent in the short run, didn't look as good in the long runs. I'm not going to be terribly high on Logano this week, starting 14th. Although he has one here in 22, and I talked about it earlier, he has the ability to lead laps here. I just don't think it's going to happen today for Logano.
Yeah.
I went down. I'm sorry. I went too low.
Well, you lumped up Logano and Blaney, which I think is very good because I think they're going to grade out the same. You know, they're both starting in the teens there. They're both, in that little in-betweener role of, I don't really want to play them. You know, they're not great, but they're not like, a complete fade or whatever. I think that they're just okay. So I'm very much okay with you lumping them together there. I think it's important to kind of note too, just on Chase Elliott, is that you mentioned if one guy doms, the likelihood that Chase Elliott would be optimal would be much higher. If you had multiple doms, then the chance kind of rolls a little bit down, right? Like what if you had 2 guys get 75 plus who are 10K and above? Well, Chase Elliott's probably not looking at being optimal there unless a lot of the lower price guys crushed. And, we're going to get into it a little bit later, but, Gragson's in the 7Ks. You got Eric Jones is in the 7Ks. It's going to be tough to fit that. It could be a very interesting rule to where if you had 2 guys over 10K, to maybe not include Chase Elliott, because all those guys have very good starting positions. And I'm just kind of open talking right now. I'm not doing this for sure without a doubt. But if you said, I'm going to have, if I have Larson and Hamlin, then I definitely don't want Chase Elliott, right? Because I think that those 2 are going to dominate the race. I think they're going to go above 20 to 25 points above him. And I just don't think I can fit it in a third stud there. I mean, if you can make it work, you can. But it definitely would be less inclined to play Chase Elliott if I had 2 guys above 10K there who I'd expect to kind of hammer home dominator points there. Because, it's not like any of these guys are PD plays except Chase. I mean, Chase is the one PD guy here above 8K, really, who you can feel confident in kind of putting up a great score. So I'm going to be very high on him. I know he's going to be in my main team. He'll likely be a core play for me. But just kind of trying to think, what's the way to play Chase Elliott? Is it the jam 2 studs with him? I get the PD with him. I know we were talking about it last week. If you had 2 studs, you could play Byron. But this week, it just feels a little bit harder because I don't think the value is as strong. Like last week, I got lucky with Kraus, but, Kraus ended up crushing, and he made everything work. This week, I just don't feel like I have anyone in that lower, 5K range where I'm like, they're going to smash. Justin Haley has been great. He's starting 28th, though, which is a little bit, kind of where he should be at. I think he can still move up a couple spots without a doubt. But it's not like, last week to where you had 2 guys starting 35th and back where you're like, oh, yeah, this is going to be sick. But, like I said, Chase Elliott's probably going to be a core play for me here. Chastain the winner on Friday. I'm very much fine just kind of forgetting about him here. Like, I don't want to chase a Trucks win, and Chastain really hasn't been that great here in the Cup Series of late. And who knows? He can get his win if he wants, but I'd rather take my chance on the guys above him and even below him with Keselowski and stuff. I'd rather have Keselowski over Chastain. Keselowski, like you said, he is getting a little bit of buzz right now. The odds to win are just fantastic. What is he, 9-1? He's the guy where I definitely wouldn't pair him and Reddick together. You would want whoever started out there to get the lead, jump out to a quick, first stage victory almost, to where all of a sudden they lead the first 90 laps. They get through no issues through pit road or anything like that. Then you're really, really looking minted. So I'd very much entertain Keselowski over the other guys here. Chase Elliott's number 1, Keselowski number 2. Then it would be Chastain, Busch, and then I would put Blaney just above Logano there. Let's go ahead and go into the 8K range here. So the 8K range, sans Logano, since we already talked about him. This is a weak range, right? And so here's what we're going to do, Stats. Since this is a weak range, to keep us talking, we're going to go 7K and up. And I know the 7K and up has 2 plays that are going to be very high on. I think a lot of people are going to be very high on. They're going to be 2 of the highest guys on the slate. That is Noah Gragson and Eric Jones. But also, I really want your opinion on Chris Buescher. Buescher looked great last week. He's not bad on these type of tracks. He's starting 3rd. It's going to be probably a little bit lower owned than, Keselowski and Reddick. What is your take on Buescher this week, and then anyone else above 7K here?
Buescher was fast in practice. He was fast short on the short runs, and he was fast on the long runs. So I think you've got to be aware. Like I said, I think RFK has a leg up here on Penske this week. If you're looking at the Fords, and the Fords have made a move this week that we have not seen on intermediate tracks. So I think Buescher's in play. The problem is, again, that starting in that 3rd position is going to be a little tricky. He's going to have to dominate here. He doesn't really even have to dominate. He's just going to have to finish high, I think. And then I think at 7,800, it gets you a shot. So if he could finish top 3, which obviously the betting markets don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, where is he now? Although he's not that far off of it. He's like the 6th choice in the betting market. So I think he's really interesting play. To be able to, at a cheap price, you may possibly get some dom points starting at that 3rd spot, where we've seen a lot of dominator points come from the top starting positions. If he could do that with a strong finish here, I could see Buescher being in the winning lineup. We mentioned Gibbs. Just don't like it. I mean, starting 4th, if you look at his odds, he's way down there. So I'm kind of getting off of Gibbs. I think Bubba Wallace in a similar situation. Bubba Wallace is even further behind Gibbs as far as his odds go, and he's starting 8th. So I think it's unlikely either one of those guys finish in the top 5 and get you the dom points that you're going to need. So I would stay away from them. The guys in this range, it's obviously Jones and Gragson are the guys that everyone will be on. And I sort of get the impression that, like, if I was playing a single entry, I would be on one of these guys and not the other. Like, that's just kind of the way I'm going to go in a single entry build and try to get. I don't want to get too chalky on a track that has shown the chalk can sometimes get gobbled up. So I think I would pick one of these guys. My lean right now would be on Jones. I think Jones is a little bit, if you look at the practice time, it wasn't great. He was 19th in practice, but he's had a pretty strong history at this track. Now you'd have to go back a little bit further. Now he's coming back off the injury, claims to be 100%. So we have to hope that is the case. He does have a first place finish here in 22. And then if you go all the way back to, 2020 and a little earlier than that, he's had a lot of strong finishes. 10th in the last race here in 2023. I think he could be sneaky, not even sneaky. He could be very good here. And obviously everyone is thinking the same way. He's starting 30th. So we got a lot of place differential. Just looking where he is in the betting markets. I mean, he's basically at the same price as Bubba Wallace in this price range. And of course you're getting a lot more on the upside as far as place differential. I think Gragson is the guy. If I was going to not play one of these guys in a single entry, I think it would probably be Gragson for me. Although it's hard to overlook the fact that he finished 6th in Vegas, which is highly correlated to this track, and he's got a 6th at Dover and a 9th in Kansas. So there's a reason he's going to be close to 50% owned, if not 50% owned. And you look at the practice times, it was good as well. I think you just have to bank on the fact in GPPs that one of these guys, something will happen to, and they won't get up to the top. So you got to pick which one you think that may be. I think the higher likelihood of a wreck is with Gragson than it is with Jones. So that's my only reason of giving the nod up to them. But for sure in MME, I'm going to have quite a bit of both of these guys. I'll be 40 to 50% at least on both of these guys in my 150 builds. So Yeah, who do we leave out? Did we leave out Bowman out of
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Talk about Bowman here because 18th is kind of in that range where you've seen, kind of unique starting positions, kind of always hit optimal here. Driving a Hendrick, like I feel like Bowman is one of those guys. So I just looked at in my main team stats. I'm sitting there, I'm like, well, Bowman fits. Like I don't love it, but at the same time, 18th is not bad for a Hendrick car. What if he gets up and inside the top 10? He could be optimal at 8K. Probably.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I initially looked at Bowman. I'm like, you know what, I think like this will be one of the guys because I'm looking in that range. Guys who started in the teens just with a strong finish are going to make it, especially at the 8K price. But then you look at where he is in the betting markets; it's not good.
No,
I mean, plus
terrible.
5,000. So that's definitely scaring me off. Excuse me. When you've got other guys, Ty Gibbs, Bubba Wallace, those guys are ahead of him. Of course, you're not getting the same place differential, but the betting market's basically saying he's not as good as those drivers, and I don't see those drivers getting into the top 5. So I'm gonna be off of Bowman here. I think you've got to play him in an MME format. I think single entries, 3 maxes, things like that. I just can't see using Bowman. I think there's some other plays at low ownership. I think if that's the idea that you're looking for to maybe get a little leverage on the field, I think there's other drivers out there that I like better than that. And Suarez is another guy we have not talked about.
Yeah.
Starting 19th. I mean, let me just quick. Suarez is even worse.
He was terrible last week.
It's brutal. Yeah. So, I mean, that's another guy. He's starting in a similar spot here to Bowman, but another guy that I would totally don't mind fading at all. I just don't see a strong finish here unless you get, again, that's what you need, these guys in the 150 in your 150 lineups, because you're going to have to get a mix in there if things get a little crazy. I'd have a hard time with a single entry playing either one of those guys.
Yeah, I think I'm almost completely out on Suarez until maybe a road course where I know he's done well kind of there, or maybe a super speedway again. I just think 19th is just so high for him. And last week he started near I think the late 20s or early 30s. I can't remember, but he just made no progress forward. It was absolutely just terrible to watch if you played him. And 19th just feels really high. And I'd much rather go to Bowman, but Bowman obviously a little bit more expensive by 1K. It definitely makes that like uncomfortable range. And Bowman is a guy where just driving a Hendrick, he's going to be in the lower 20%. I think he's going to be much higher owned than what people might expect, just because, he's kind of got that appetizing starting position. And you look at it, you go up to Blaney at 9K, he's like the lowest starting position until you get to Jones, outside of Elliott. If people are just going to just fall on Bowman a ton. So I'm kind of not really wanting to do it stats, but I think he's going to be like that guy where, he's going to be a last guy in on many, many teams. And I think a lot of people are going to be okay with it. And we also have, 20 minutes left in the show, but you talked about practice earlier and we got a question. How much stock do you put in practice? You made a point that you put a little bit more stock in practice on this week more than other weeks, right?
Yeah, this week practice time seem to correlate a little bit better, and you want to look at the longer run practice times here with the tire wear situation. So that's what I'm looking at. And 15, I think that was the most laps everyone ran together. So I'm kind of looking at that 15 lap time.
Perfect. And the rain on Friday, washed away. A lot of the rubber and the trucks are really tearing up their tires early on in the race. Didn't seem to be exactly the case in Xfinity. Obviously, there was still a heavy fall off, but the track is nice and rubbered in. There shouldn't be any rain, I don't think, in the forecast today. So we should have a race that is on time, not finishing late today. So it should be fun. You made the comment on Jones and Gregson not wanting to pair them up in single entries, which is a very interesting thing. I really like both those guys. I think Gregson's the one who I just prefer just because of Jones with a little bit of ambiguity on his back. Corey Heim did a good job in the car and stuff. So we know the car still has speed. But yeah, Jones, you look at it, you ever get a win, a couple years ago for a driver where I'm not saying, he's no like Denny Hamlin or Kyle Larson in terms of their equipment and stuff. So if you do well in track history, to me, it matters a ton for a guy like Eric Jones. So very much high on him. Very much love Gregson. I think Gregson's a guy where he dominated most of the tracks we went to in Xfinity. But Darlington's one where, he's just got a great history. He's got great speed. You mentioned what he did in Vegas. Like Gragson to me is just very, very tough to go away from starting. This is last. So it would take him wrecking out to not have at least a very, very strong bit of being optimal. And if people want to bank on him wrecking, that's fine. But what you got is a guy with talent and a decent car who can absolutely, rip it inside the top 18. That's all he needs. He only needs a top 20, I think, to be optimal. I think top 20 is over 44 fantasy points, I believe. If you do a 20th place finish, don't quote me on that just yet. I have to look it up on the scoring system just to confirm. But Jones is in a very similar spot as well. Both those guys are great. And this is where you're talking about like large field tournaments. Like if you pair those two up, well, how many other people are pairing those two up? How many more ways can you get unique? It's much tougher to do it at that point. So
they may be paired up 25% of lineups.
Yes. So. And you're going to have Bragson, you think he's going to be over 50%, like that. It's very high. I think Jones probably going to be, closer to 45, 40% now that you're, after hearing you talk and stuff. Like, yeah, these two guys are going to be so high owned. You just got to remember, you're going against a field of people. I'm surely going to have lineups with them paired, but I definitely want to be a little bit more careful where you're not just jamming the four highest owned guys in a lineup and then putting in two 20%ers, because you're not getting 100K to first at that point. You're probably getting 4K to first if you chop, which is fine. But you just got to realize that maybe sometimes you don't really want to dupe too much in your main teams or any team that you do in the big lotto. So yeah, I mean, you went over it. I want to give my Butcher take, actually. I'm buying on Butcher this week. I'm buying on him. If you're going to be buying on Keselowski too, you might as well buy on Butcher. Not in the same team per se, but like, have them a little bit, right? You want to kind of mix it up with those two. I think you could even throw in like, in those dominator teams, like a min one dominator at most two. Yeah, throw those guys in there. And Butcher especially looking great last week. You say he's looking very strong in practice. The odds are loving him this week too. I was very salty I didn't have him last week because what you saw was a guy with speed. It wasn't a fluke. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, here he is, on brand new tires, or maybe the strategy fell in his favor. No, he has speed. So I'm very much happy to go back to Butcher here. The problem is, would I pair Butcher up in a single entry team with like Larson or anything like that? Because I just told you, Bowman was fitting that team. Do I go down to Butcher? Butcher is obviously much more risky. He's got to be able to lead laps, and I think he can. But if you don't get those laps led, you're looking at a mediocre, 30 fantasy point performance, which the more I talk stats, the more I can talk myself into that at 7-8. How many people are going to outperform, 40 DK in this range? And honestly, the projection range at anyone under 9K is really weak. I mean, outside Gragson and Jones, you're kind of left in this dead spot. And that's why Bowman's going to hit a lot. But I think I'm talking myself into Butcher. I think I'm probably going to go to Butcher a lot more than I thought. And the reason being, this range is really weak after the studs. And Butcher can absolutely be that guy to kind of take the helm. And all of a sudden, what if he did lead 30 laps? He's optimal. He's optimal if he led 30 laps, got a 10th place finish. All of a sudden, you're looking at 44 fantasy points, which not a great finish, not a great performance, but it's better than anyone else in this range. I'm willing to take that risk. 6K range now. We got McDowell. We got Dillon. Cindric was very fast in practice. You got Briscoe. Josh Berry starting 33rd. And then obviously we got Nemechek, who was dealing with a power steering issue in Xfinity race yesterday, but then ended up getting it solved and still not producing the greatest finish in the world. But, we got cars down here. I wouldn't say they're great cars, but we got cars down here. Cindric is the one who excites me the most here, stats. And then, as sad as it is, I think Berry is second. And then it kind of just, it feels very gross again. This range stats. It's like the 6K range is just,
For the most part, yeah. For the most part, it's a little ugly. We got news this week. McDowell's moving over to Spire, right?
Yep.
So just anticipate that he will be in crappy equipment for the rest of the year at Ford. He's leaving Ford and his team. Point. So outside of when he races, he's really good at the restricted plates and road races. But other than that, he's probably going to be a no-go in these type of tracks. So I would kind of toss it. There's a lot of guys here that you really aren't going to get too excited about playing in this range. Briscoe starting 13th. Hopefully it's not a situation like Buescher last week, starting in a similar spot, but I don't see it there. I think we could kind of toss out Briscoe. You could toss out Stenhouse starting 20th. McDowell, as I said, don't really like Austin Dillon here at all either. And Nemechek starting 22nd. Don't like it. I think the two guys here that you are going to have some play on, Cindric is going to get a little bit of ownership. I think he's interesting. He was fast in practice, starts 25th. So you can get some decent place differential. I have no problem with Cindric. Again, he's in the Penske, but I keep saying I think RFK is going to be a little faster here, but at 6,200, I don't mind playing him a bit with the speed that he showed. He showed, a decent early speed or short run speed and some pretty decent long run speed. Not great history so far this year. Vegas 29th. He was Texas. He was 25th, 15th at Dover, and 37th at Kansas. So he hasn't really shown it yet. That's going to keep his ownership down, but he's in the mix for me. I think the guy who's going to get the most ownership, though, is going to be Berry at 6,700, starting 33rd. We get all that potential place differential upside. He's had a couple of good finishes. I mean, Kansas, a 15th, Dover, a 14th finish. And you look at his practice times, they were really, really good. Top 10 in long run speed. So I think Berry's the guy where the ownership's going to be coming in on here. He's in a Ford, which the Fords are looking a little bit better this week. 6,700, I expect Berry to get quite a bit of ownership. And, I can see why with the place differential that he gives you top 15 upside here starting 33rd, and at 6,700, that should get it done.
Yeah, very much so. And it's going to be very interesting to kind of go around this, range where you don't really need to walk on eggshells. Like if you were playing multiple lineups or whatever, you can kind of just step on whatever shells that you want, and just hope to get a little bit lucky. But like you make a good point there where, we go to the sheet here that you have up, right? We got this, all our slams and core plays and stuff. Like this isn't a range where you just want to X out people, right? Like this is a range where I don't want to live in it, but any of these guys can probably have a bid to be optimal. I think McDowell is the only one who I just don't like. And you made a great point there. Moving over to Spire and obviously ditching the team early. Not early. I mean, obviously it's silly season. We have that going on and stuff. But what you got with McDowell is definitely probably going to be the one who, we don't really care about him as much as the others, right? So McDowell is the only one who I was coming in already. You made a great point about the silly season and stuff, but with him moving teams, I was already off him. But Stenhouse is fine, but like none of these guys except for McDowell and Briscoe. I gotta mention Briscoe and Suarez. I already mentioned. I'm done with him. But Briscoe and McDowell are the two guys I'm just off of. And Briscoe I could be talked back on just to get even a little bit. But ultimately, this is a range where I'm not going to be just too entertained by. I'm not going to just go completely Xing out people, but I'll probably X out McDowell, Briscoe, and maybe Suarez. But Briscoe I could keep in. Let's move on down to the 5K range here. Stats. When I look at it, we got options. We got Harrison Burton starting 35th. Got Cash Crawl at 34th. You got, cult heroes, I would say at this point. Carson Hocevar starting 21st, where he's always got ownership. And his odds to win, are the best in this range, except for one guy. Todd Gilliland starting 15th. Todd Gilliland is probably the one who provides the biggest headache, would you say? Because he's got good odds to win, 90-1. I mean, like for this price range, I just got to mention that. For this price range, he has the best odds. 6.8K and down? Oh, McDowell and Cindric actually haven't beat. But what you do here is, what if I told you 19th place? Is that enough for Todd Gilliland? If he almost held position here? I don't know if the answer is yes. Let me go ahead and get that final total of how many fantasy points that would be. But go ahead and talk about what you plan to do with him.
Yeah, I don't know if that's good enough, but Gilliland's the guy that I'm really interested in this week. Just because how many guys down at this level, and the answer is none, have the kind of speed that he showed in practice. I mean, he was fourth best in practice on the 15 lap time. So he's in pretty, it seems like he's got pretty good equipment. He's got speed this week. Now he starts 15th. That's the conundrum, right? If he started anywhere in the 20s, I think he becomes a much more intriguing play. But I'm going to be very interested in Gilliland. I just think you've got some upside potential here. I do think he's got top 10, a top 10 type of car. And if things kind of break right for someone with that kind of speed this week, I think he's interesting at a really low price. So, 5,500, he doesn't have to do anything too crazy other than get us. If he moves in a positive direction, I think if he gets you to 11, 12, 13th, something like that, I think he could be in the winner. It's obviously going to depend on the high price guys up top. If we get a lot of those guys, we're going to need someone cheap. And historically, what we've seen is at least one guy in this 5K range makes it into the nuts. So he's an interesting choice because you're probably getting the best car in the 5K range. The problem is you're getting the highest starting position in this 5K range. I think the rest of the guys, you're for the most part, you're throwing some darts outside of maybe Burton, Haley, and Hemrick. Those are probably your three next best choices when it comes to cars here and potential finishing position outside of Gilliland. But I think Gilliland's going to finish better than all of these other cars. I think it's just a matter of how high do Burton, Haley, or Hemrick get it. Burton starting at 35th, so plenty of potential to move up. He did finish 6th here last year. You've got Haley is starting at the 28th spot. I think is going to be, it will be getting a decent amount of ownership. Has an 8th place finish here, a 3rd place finish. Hasn't particularly been great as neither is Burton this year on the 1.5 mile type tracks. I know it's 1.3, the intermediate type tracks. Hasn't been all that great. Neither one of them with a strong finish in Vegas. But, we're picking the bottom of the barrel and we're trying to pick someone that's going to fit and kind of fill in the lineups for us. And those are going to be the three guys, Haley, Burton, and Hemrick, if you're not looking at taking a shot on Gilliland. But I'm leaning towards taking the shot with Gilliland. I just think it's going to be hard to overlook that kind of speed. And I think if he avoids trouble, it could be a really, really good day for Todd Gilliland. And he was in the nuts here, I believe, last year. Gilliland, yeah, he was in last season. He started 24th, made his way to the nuts at 5,500, at a 5,500 price tag. Got you, I don't know where he finished and where he finished in that race, but he finished 11th in that race. So, he's got that potential to get you. I think if he gets up into that 10 to 12 range, and I think he could do better than that, I think he winds up in the nuts.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it too, like in just 2023, what he has done here at this track, and this is Todd Gilliland, 2022 in the spring race here, 15th, 2023 in the spring race here, 11th, right? And the fall races weren't as great, 28th and 26th, but what you have seen here, and, sometimes, some of the best drivers get taken out. You don't want to just inflate that, but he can finish top 15 here. I mean, that's all that matters. If he held position, that would be 28 fantasy points. Like if he held a 15th place finish, that's probably enough at 5.5K. Can he move up? I think the answer is kind of yes, because what we have seen from him is all of a sudden you're just looking up, especially at Martinsville, it was the only guy to be able to pass. And to me, that matters. Like, I know this is a completely different track, completely different stuff, but when you show speed just like that in general, we know he's got a little bit of talent in there, and we know he can absolutely drive it up. And we've seen it before here at Darlington. He's got 2 top 15 finishes under his belt. In the last 4 races here in the Cup Series, 50% of the time he gets top 15. I'm willing to take that risk here all day with Gilliland. Justin Haley's a guy who I'm going to be interested in. Same with Hemrick. This is the same thing with a range where I'm just not going to be too committed to anyone down here. But I think Gilliland is going to be my favorite driver down here. And then it would be Haley. Then it would kind of have a little bit of a drop off. Then it would be Hemrick, Burton. Maybe you get the fastest laps roulette with Kraus again. And what it is, I mean, with the high tire wear track, whatever shitbox car is sitting there at the last second that didn't pit, is sitting out there for another 30 extra laps. The thing with Kraus last week was absolutely hilarious. Because what I knew, I texted my friend, I'm like, does Kraus have the car to get those fastest laps? Because he knew he had the freshest tires by like, I don't know, at least a dozen laps or whatever. And you also got some laps led. It was just absolutely like hilarious. And I think, you don't want to just completely rule yourself out of that, right? Like if you were in the, $1.20 entry max and stuff, yeah, you can make a little bit more stands, the $4.20 max, like, but in a 150 max setting, I wouldn't X these guys just purely because what can happen. Like one guy stays out later than the others. Like they all project almost the exact same. Like Gilliland's the only guy. Gilliland and Haley are the only two guys that I feel very confident about potentially scoring really well. And the others, like I'm just hoping to get lucky. And we got lucky last week. We'll take lucky last week. Lucky is good, but definitely don't want to just rule myself out of it for DFS purposes. Here's a good question here from Jake. Gibbs, Bowman, or Busher? Who has the best DFS performance today? Stats.
Yeah, it's Busher for me because I think he's just got the highest potential. I mean, he's got potential to be the highest scorer on the slate. I mean, it's unlikely, but I just don't see those other guys being able. They don't have the car he has this week.
All right, so you know what time it is, Stats. It is time for our driver of the day. So let's go ahead and get out the ownership wheel here. Let's see what it is. Let's see. Oh, I accidentally hit the wrong button. It is under 20%. That's going to be the cutoff. And you have way more drivers to choose from than usual. I feel like it's a little bit more dispersed below 20%. I already have mine eyeballed. Let's see what your driver of the day is here for Darlington.
Yeah, I mean, I like to go as crazy as I possibly can with these picks. I'm going right to the guy we were just talking about. I'm going to go with Gilliland, and I'm taking the speed and 5,500. I think he finds his way at that price into a winning lineup today. So that's my guy under 6K that I would be playing, and I'm going to say he gets in the nuts once again.
Love it. I love it. Todd Gilliland, 5.5K stats. It is not the play of the day, the driver of the day. My driver of the day is also a guy that we just talked about, Chris Busher. I'm going to back him at under 8K. And the reason is this range is kind of a dead range. You don't need a huge dominating performance from Chris Busher. All I'm asking for is a top 10 and give me 35 laps led. And I think that can definitely be enough for Chris Busher to be in the optimal. And you know what? He's got a good car. He's got great odds. He can absolutely move it up to where all of a sudden you're looking up at your screen. He's got 60 laps led. He's one of the main dominators of the race. I'm willing to take that risk with Chris Busher all day. We'll definitely be over the field on him and may even be in my main team. So I'm very interested to see how this shakes out. Once again, we thank y'all for watching. If Stats and I don't win today, well, then we hope it's one of y'all. And maybe even we can split and hold hands. And, if everyone's going to play Jones and Gregson together, you could definitely see some holding hands at the top if they crush. But again, thank y'all for watching. Have a great rest of y'all's day and happy Mother's Day. And bye-bye.